got him up and we brought him back overhead. The pointers were vibrating and we sent them in and they flushed this covey of about 15 or 20 birds. And greys are different to red partridge. Red partridge don't explode into the air. They flush in ones or twos, but it was just a mass explosion. And he folded up and we watched him dropping down, and you could hear the impact that as his bell hit, as he struck the partridge, knocked it over, he threw up and he come down and he made into it.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome back for another episode of the Falconry Toll podcast, and this episode also happens to be the start of our next international series, which takes place in the UK. And I have to start off by mentioning the two Falconers who, without their help, this series wouldn't have been able to happen. The first is Neil Davies from Pursuit Falconry and Conservation magazine. You've probably heard us promote the magazine on the podcast before, but if you haven't got a chance to check it out yet, I highly recommend it, and the publication is doing a lot to promote the art of falconry across the world. There's always lots of great content in it, so if you haven't subscribed yet, go to pursuitfalconry.co.uk and sign up for your subscription. It's well worth it. The other Falconer is one that you've heard on the podcast before, being Simon Tyers. He is the author of The Specialist Falcon, and the book is about his personal approach to lowland game hawking. It's been described as being one of the best modern books of our era by a lot of falconers, and is well worth the read. I found this book to be very informative and very enjoyable, and so I highly recommend that you go to thespecialistfalcon.com and pick up a copy, and you can even have the copy signed by Simon as well. So thank you again very, very much, Neil and Simon, for bringing me over and allowing me to help all these falconers from the UK have a voice and share their stories and experiences with the world. I hope you, the listeners, enjoy the series a lot and get something out of it. And thank you very much for all of your continued support and for listening. And with that, we are going to start off this first episode of the international series featuring the UK with Steve Halsall. He is a renowned hood maker and has a lot of cool stories and experiences. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn things over to that conversation with Steve. So here we go. Steve, it's great to meet you. Appreciate you giving me 45 minutes to an hour-ish or however long we do this of your time. Just to start off with, where exactly are you from again?
I'm from an area called Southport, which is on the northwest coast. It's a small seaside resort, great marshlands, great stubble fields for hunting partridge, and it lies between Liverpool and Preston. The northwest is sort of the centre of the country. If you take it from the top of Scotland down to Cornwall, the northwest region lies right smack bang in the middle. Only a small country, but a great country as well.
I don't doubt it. From what I've seen so far, it's pretty nice. It reminds me a lot of Indiana, to be honest, in a lot of areas, but I wouldn't have thought that coming in. But then I kind of thought the same thing whenever I landed in Germany and a couple of the other Eastern European countries as well before. But
yeah, it's a nice country, nice countryside, and a mixture of countryside, especially falcons are concerned. There's some great lowland hawking around this area for partridges and pheasants. Then you can travel to where I live in the northwest on the Pennine, and there's some great grouse moors. Or you can go further down south onto Salisbury Plain and do some rook hawking. So within a small catchment area, you've got a lot of hawking.
Do you have the same kind of issues that some of the other falconers that reside in this country have as far as finding access to land and stuff, or have you ever had an issue with that?
It's never been an issue, but it's always been difficult. I started flying hawks in 1972. 50 years ago, I imported a Lana falcon from Nigeria and hunted on the marshlands. But the place has changed. Some of the big shoots have closed down and they've gone into smaller syndicates. And it's always difficult to get on land that's being shot over. the game's prized by the guns and they're paying a good quality price to shoot this stuff. Sometimes they don't want falconers wandering around the place, but usually when we've got on the land, they see that, it's very little impact that the falcons or the hawks cause. So we usually welcome back. And there's a few of us now who are putting birds down ourselves. We've formed syndicates. Some of us go up to Scotland grouse hawking. And there's lots of hawking to be had. You've just got to look for it.
It's always interesting talking to other falconers that have been around this area. And so far, I've really only gotten a chance to really talk at length with Simon Tyers and Jose Sudo and talking to them about how, and other people that kind of, met in passing or whatever.
Yeah.
It's interesting how, I guess, privatized a lot of the land has. So, I mean, in the U.S., we're used to having a lot of access to public lands
Sure.
and stuff too. So I always find it fascinating, talking to other falconers around this area, especially that have other experiences or I know it's difficult for everybody, but, that don't have an issue, with as much as others with
Sure.
that. So,
yeah. In the early days, it was a lot easier in the case that there weren't as many falconers about. Captive breeding hadn't really started then. So we were obtaining birds under license. And I can remember when I first decided that I wanted to get into falconry, and I used to go to my local library, and there was only 2 books then. Now you can go online and you can research anything. If you want to see sage grouse hawking, you click on the button and you can see sage grouse hawking. Mm-hmm. You want to go red grouse hawking in Scotland, you can click on a button and you can see red grouse hawking. But in them days, it was difficult. And I can remember thinking, I'd really like to get to know somebody who was actually participated in falconry and could mentor me, but it was difficult because there was no one around in my area. And I can remember I used to go to the library. I worked quite close to it, and there was 2 books you could get. And there was The Goshawk by T.H. White, which doesn't help your falconry skills, but there was a great book called The Manual of Falconry by Michael Woodford, and that become my Bible, really. But I can remember I used to go in and read it in my dinner hour and then put it back on the shelf, and it become a bit of an obsession, really. I'd even go in and have a look at the dates when people had taken this book out, and I thought, wow, there's another guy in Southport or a lady who's interested in falconry. It's not only me, but I couldn't make contact with them. It become, I suppose, sort of stalking. I even put a note in the book once and said, please, if you're interested in falconry, contact me because I feel the same. Nobody got back in touch with me, I'm afraid to say. But as the years went on and I got to know more people from the British Falconers Club that I joined, and then captive breeding come along, and that opened the door for a lot of people who'd wanted to participate in the sport but had never had the opportunity to get a bird under license. They become available to them, and that changed falconry massively in this country. Whereas the area I live in now, Southport, from about 72 to 1980, I was more than likely the only practicing falconer in that area. And now there might be 20 guys in that area, which is good, It's good to get together with them all, but it comes back to that access to land then. It's the cake's being cut up into 20 pieces now, not into one piece. So
sure,
it brings its problems.
Oh, I don't doubt it. And I know how hard it is to find good spots, and the number of good spots decrease every passing year too.
Yeah.
To development, construction,
Yeah.
You name it,
Yeah.
and so I always am just ecstatic whenever we're able to find other spots, because once you start getting X amount of hawks in the field, sometimes you've got guys that'll bring more than one bird, and you just start running out of spots. Next thing you know, you're getting into fist fights, trying to compete for for bunnies and
yeah.
So that's good though, that you, even though you've had some issues, you still have places to hunt and have access. So.
Yeah, there's places we couldn't go at one time that have now opened up to us, because like I said, some of the larger shoots in the area that have closed down and they've been put into syndicates now. The farmers who farm the land form their own syndicates and they sell off the shooting. It's a lot easier now to get on that sort of land than it was on the big estates. But where I love to hawk ducks on the marshlands, that's all nature reserve now, so by the RSPB, so we're not allowed on there, which is a shame because, very little impact we cause to the birds, as you know, and we used to have some great duck hawking out there. But these things are sent to try us, Jonathan. They're sent to try us.
That they are. Well, I'm glad that, 50 years, that's a long time. I'm glad that you've kept your I don't know, I guess for you it's probably an obsession as well.
An obsession indeed. Do you know what my mum said? When I was 15, I'd gone to a place called the Welsh Mountain Zoo to watch the falconry display, and when I come back from there, I've been infested with falconry, and I have been ever since. I'm proud to say so. Nice.
So that was your kind of your origin story, so to speak. Was that what initially got you bit by the bug?
Yeah, I don't know how really I come into it because I come from a background of not a hunting family at all. My brother was into football. My dad really didn't have an interest in many things about going to the pub for a pint and playing dominoes. So for me to get this obsession with falconry, I don't know where it come from. I can remember on a school trip, my first memory of falconry, I was 8, and we went to this place again called the Welsh Mountain Zoo. And they had falconry displays there. And there was a famous falconer who's passed away now, but he was the head falconer there, a guy from Hungary called Laurent de Bastii, and he's written a few books. And he's a really colourful guy. And I can remember going there, and we went around the corner and we come to a big lawn, and there was umpteen falcons, eagles, hawks. There must have been 50 birds on there, and there was 2 falconers. There was Laurent de Bastii and a guy called Harry Robinson, and they run the falconry section at the zoo. And I was mesmerised by it, and especially the hoods, these hoods on the birds. I'd seen some old movies with, James Robertson Justice and a few others in, and seen these hooded falcons on guys' fists going out into the field. And, I thought it was very romantic, and watching these birds being flown was superb. But it was something that I thought had died out centuries ago until suddenly, we're at the Welsh Mountain Zoo, and I'm there in the middle of this falconry lawn looking at these hooded falcons, which fascinated me. So, that's when it started. I was 8 at the time. And then, it progressed. It sort of lay dormant for a while. When I come back from there, I didn't think, right, I'm going to go and get myself a falcon. But it always stayed with me. And then we read a book at school, A Kestrel for a Knave. And that's got lots of falconry in it. And then the film come out in this country called Kes, and I watched that at 14. And that's when I decided I wanted to get myself a hawk. And the following year I did. And we've had birds with us ever since.
Nice. Okay, so you've been doing this, like we just mentioned, for a very long time.
Yeah.
So do you think that the evolution of your falconry has kind of gone in line some with the evolution of falconry in general in this country? Or do you think that, there's been a lot of unique changes to the way you do things as opposed to just kind of how things have gone over time? Or
I'm a dinosaur looking at some of these guys now, with the drones and the GPSs. And you got to remember back to 1972 when I got the first bird, we had a bell on its tail, and that's how we had to find the things, and many were lost. And I lost a particularly good falcon one year, and had I had telemetry, I'd have recovered it. So things have changed, and for the better. There's some great falconers about, flying some great falcons. Some young guys are coming through, and they amaze me. And they've got that enthusiasm. I can see it there inside them, in their eyes. They've got that passion for the sport, and I love that. I love seeing it. Not as many young guys are around flying hawks in this country as there used to be. The club I'm in, the British Falconers Club, we did a survey about 10 years ago of the membership to see what they'd want out of the club. Did they want the newsletters? Did they want the journal? Did they want field meets? Whatever they wanted, and we filtered all this. But from all the information that we collated, the outstanding fact was the membership was getting older, and we didn't have as many young people coming in. So it was dying out, and, that's what we've got to change.
Yeah, and there's good and bad ways at times of going about that too, because everybody wants to bring people into the sport and the heritage that are going to represent it well, and there's always you're always looking for the best candidates to kind of pass on the knowledge to, and all. I'm sure that isn't any different here than anywhere else, I bet, right? I
think so. I think wherever you go in the world, there's guys who are coming into the sport and want to learn about it. I think the beneficial thing they've got now is the internet. If I'd have had the internet when I was 15 and I could have contacted people, it would have made it a lot easier for me to get into falconry. Now, whether that had made me a better falconer, I don't know, because, you learn from your mistakes sometimes, don't you?
Sure.
But it swings and roundabouts. The way it's evolved, it's good in some ways with captive breeding. There was at one time when we never thought we'd have a peregrine falcon again to fly, and now there's loads of peregrine falcons to flying that are being bred in captivity. But I don't know whether it makes better falconers or worse falconers. Some guys start off and then they fall out of falconry, and then a few years later, because life changes things, doesn't it? Kids come along and mortgages and jobs and all sorts. But the true falconers stick at it, and they don't fall by the wayside. I've got some good friends who I've fought with for many years, and I still think of myself as one of the young guys in the falconry club, really, but I'm not. I'm one of the older guys now. But I like seeing the younger ones, and there's some great falconers out there. That some of these guys are flying really high-flying falcons, which we never dreamed of. We never thought we'd see the falconry that we see at the moment in this country. It is fantastic. Falconry is going in the right direction.
Yeah, I'm glad that it's going in the right direction here too. I mean, I'm like I said, I'm really glad that there are a lot of other people kind of coming up in these newer generations that seem to be, like you described, really enthusiastic, really passionate, and that's when you know that people are usually right for the sport and the heritage aspect of it all, is because generally someone who's that passionate and just that ate up with it is going to want to represent.
You mean when they're infected like me?
Yes. I mean, any of us that are nuts enough to continue to do this decade in and year in, and in your case decade year in and out. It's I mean, you're either ate up with it or it seems like you're just kind of not. There's usually not any in between, and for the guys that seem to kind of have that in between, those are the ones that you see usually just kind of falling off.
Yeah, they fall by the wayside. Yeah. My wife said to me once, I can remember a particularly difficult Saker falcon that I was starting to train, and this bird really frustrated me. I'd handled many hawks by the time this one, which had been bred in captivity, come into my hands. It was, a beautiful bird, Altai Saker, everything going for it, but its temperament was really, really bad. And one evening when I come out and the training was going backwards, we weren't going forwards with this bird, we were going backwards. The thing wouldn't even sit on me fist hooded now, let alone feed. And I can remember coming out of the mews and I can remember headbutting the wall in frustration. And that's when my wife said to me, do you not think it's time you try to get rid of that bird and perhaps get another one? But I persisted with it, and I tried a completely different technique. I got in touch with a friend who'd flown a lot of Sakers over the years, and he said, why don't you try this, Steve? And I tried the technique that he showed me, and it worked, so we can all learn things, can't we? I've been handling birds for perhaps 25, 30 years, and I went to this other guy who'd been doing it half as long as me, but he'd flown a lot more Sakers than I had. And he said, why don't you try this way? And I give it a go. And things popped into place, and I didn't headbutt any more walls.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, that's why anybody that thinks that just because they haven't been in it for very long, that they don't have necessarily something to offer, you just never know.
Yeah.
I mean, you can always learn something, and every new bird is a new experience for sure. So, but so, I mean, is being around and practicing, falconry as long as you have, What have been some of the changes that you've seen take place in this country with the different rules, regulations, and just the types of, just the access to birds, all that stuff?
Well, as we've said, the access to birds got better with captive breeding. The captive bred babes, you could have any falcon you want now. In the early days, we were just breeding Sakers and Lanners and Peregrines, and then AI in coming to the country. I remember meeting up with Jim Weaver, and he was explaining to us about the techniques of AI in, and a few of my friends started doing that, and we produced some nice prairie peregrines. I flew one of them. They were great birds, and any crosses you can get now, whatever designer falcons really, I suppose. But I've got nothing against designer falcons if they're looked after properly and they're flown properly. No problems whatsoever. I like pure breeds myself, particularly Tearsall peregrines. I think they're really well matched to English partridge that we fly in this country. So looking at the bird situation, that's gone forward. In 1981, the Wildlife and Countryside Act come into force in this country, and all birds had to be registered and inspected. A little bit more legislation, but that was good for the sport too. It made sure that people were keeping the birds properly and doing things in the right way. But then licensing has come in now. Depending what type of bird you want to fly, you have to apply for a license. If you want to go lark hawking with a merlin, you have to apply for a license for larks, which will be granted by the DEFRA if you're lucky enough. If you want to fly a sparrowhawk at blackbirds, you can get a license for that. All game birds, a legitimate quarry anyway. And then you need different licenses to fly rooks and crows and seagulls, and the vermin species, I suppose. I don't do that. I just do game hawking. So there's a lot more legislation and red tape involved in it now, but it can be achieved. You just got to fill the forms in and make sure you do it properly, and there's no problem.
Sure. Well, where there's a will, there's a way, I guess, right?
Definitely.
Well, as far as just the ability to, the way you acquire birds, was there ever a point in time whenever you were starting, or even as things evolved over time, were you ever able to take passage birds or anything like that?
Yeah. In 72, when I obtained my first bird, it was a Lanner falcon, and I imported her from Nigeria, or him, I should say. It was a Lanneret, and that was under license. You had to write to the Home Office in Whitehall in London, put your application in for the bird, say who you got to sponsor you, to mentor you, and send the application off. And then it went in front of a board which was made up of falconers, vets and other people, and they looked at the applications and looked who was really a good candidate for taking the bird. And if you were lucky, you got your license. So that's how we got hold of most of the birds. By that time, there was very few licenses being processed for British peregrines because of DDT. They'd taken a hammering in the wild, and the breeding numbers had really fallen, as with most birds of prey. But you could still get the license to import the birds from far afield. From, like I say, we had lots of birds coming in from Africa, from Nigeria. We had Lanners, and we had red-naped Shaheens. And then there was a couple of companies in India who we dealt with. One was called Dar and Dar, and they were exporters of Saker falcons and black Shaheens and red-headed merlins, so we had birds coming in from them. We were also getting birds from a company called Mohammed Din & Co., and he was a really famous hawk trapper in Pakistan, and he also was famous for making Lahore bells, but you could get birds off Mohammed Din & Co. So there was birds coming into the country, not enough birds to meet the demands of people who were coming along who wanted to fly them. But then getting towards the mid-70s, the late 70s, we were making the breakthroughs then with breeding Lanner falcons and Sakers. And then in 81, we got licenses for peregrines again, which we took out the wild. And we went on to breed from them. And the rest, as they say now, is history. We become self-sufficient. Funnily enough, some of the protectionist lobbies when we wanted to get these birds under license, the peregrines, to breed them, they were completely against it and saying, no, you can't possibly breed from these birds. They're too wild, and they're too this and they're too the other. And then, but we did get some, and we started breeding them. And now, when we want the licenses again, even though they have issued a few in the last couple of years, the protectionists say, well, why do you want to take these birds out the wild? You're breeding them now. So it was a two-edged sword. But yeah, it's good. It's a fascinating sport, no doubt. Massive part of my life and my family's life as well. Yeah, we love it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the massive amounts of history just from country to country is just fascinating in and of itself. Yeah. Even if you aren't interested in practicing, there's just so much. It's such a rich history. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it can be impactful. I mean, we were talking earlier about, you mentioned the whole family aspect. I mean, my family tolerates it. My son and doesn't really care. My wife, she doesn't really like birds, but she tolerates it because she knows I like it. But in that aspect of it, the impact on each individual person and family is fascinating too, I think. Yeah,
it's great. Yeah. My family life, all the kids, I've got 5 kids, and they've all been brought up around falcons and hawks, and they don't even bat an eyelid when they walk into the house, or there's a falcon or a hawk sat around somewhere. And my wife enjoys it as well. She helps me man the birds. So yeah, but I don't really think they realise what's going on now. They're that used to it. It's part of the fabric of our life, having these birds in front of us. Bit different when a boyfriend or one of the girlfriends comes around, and sees this falcon sat on the back of a chair somewhere. You don't see that everywhere, do you? So, but they are warned about it before they come. A story to tell you is about when I was 13 or 14 and I wanted to get me this kestrel. I decided I was going to go and find a kestrel's nest and take a kestrel and train it. And I told my mum about it, and she wasn't too keen. And my grandma was completely against it because she'd seen a film called The Vikings, and Kirk Douglas and Tony Curtis was in it. And Tony Curtis throws this goshawk at Kirk Douglas, and it rips his eye out. So my grandma thought I was going to get my eyes ripped out by this kestrel. And my mum was called Elizabeth, but for short, Betty. And she said, "Oh, Betty, don't let him get this kestrel, it'll take his eyes out." But luckily my eyes are still here to sew the hoods.
That's awesome. So was that your first bird, or talk a little bit about how you kind of learned and who mentored you, if anyone in particular mentored you, and just go talk a little bit more about your introduction and your beginning history.
Okay, well, the early days, I was looking for kestrel nests, and I found one, and they were few and far between because of DDT. In that bird chain, the kestrels were affected like peregrine falcons and everything else. But a keeper on one of the estates near to me, I put the word out that I was looking for this kestrel, and a friend at school said his dad knew where there was a kestrel's nest. A lad called John Johnson, who was a local gamekeeper. So I went to see Johnny Johnson, and he said, "Yeah, you need to go down to the Fernwood, as it's called. There's a kestrel nest in there." He says, "Because if you don't take one, I'm going to kill them anyway." So the gamekeeper wasn't too pleased having the kestrels on his land, even though they did no damage.
Right.
So yeah, we went down there. We located the nest, and I took it. And I took it home, and I'd already set my muse up. I'd read the book, The Manual of Falconry. As I said, there was only 2 books to read then. Back in that day, falconry wasn't as popular, so there hadn't been as many books written. But Manual of Falconry is a good book. Michael Woodford, the author, had become a close friend. He died a few years ago, but the way he explained how you needed to set your muse up, a darkened room with your screen perch, and get your kestrel, take it at a certain age. And I just followed the rules of the book. We got the kestrel home. It wasn't fully down then, so I left it in a room on its own and just popped food in so it didn't see me. I didn't want it to imprint and scream. Then one night we went in with a torch and we checked its deck feathers, and they were hard penned. So, the story began. Got the kestrel. It had been jessed up by this time, but put a swivel and a leash on it. Didn't have a hood at this moment in time, but the Manual of Falconry didn't say that you needed a hood anyway, so for a kestrel, so I decided that I was going to train it without a hood. So did the usual things, sat in the darkened room with a candle in one corner and a kestrel on my fist in the other, and a bit of meat in my hand, and the kestrel had bayed off my fist, and it'd blow the candle out, and it was absolutely pandemonium, but I just persevered, and slowly the kestrel come around, started feeding on my fist, and just went through the basic things with it, manning, taking it everywhere. And then it come to the time when I decided I wanted a hood for this bird, because I'd looked at the manual of falconry, and there was hooded falcons in that. The kestrel wasn't hooded, but there was peregrines and sakers and lanners hooded. So I decided I was going to make a hood, which wasn't the easiest thing to do. But luckily, at that time, I'd started work at upholsterers, and we were using a lot of leather and sewing different things of furniture. So I went into work, and I had a talk with one of the guys, and he said, yeah, I think we can make one of these, but you need a pattern. So I said, right, well, I'll try and get a pattern. Well, there was no patterns in the manual of falconry, but there was a book called A Hawk for the Bush by Jack Mavrocordato that was printed in 1966. So I went to, and that had hood patterns in it. I'd been told by somebody else, you get a hood pattern from that book. So I went to the library and I ordered the book. They didn't have it in stock at my local library, but there was one in a place called Wakefield, which was in Yorkshire. So they ordered it from there, and it took several weeks to come, and the book come, and at the back of it, anybody who's read A Hawk for the Bush by Jack Mavrocordato know there's a section at the back that's full of hood patterns. So the big day come, and the book arrived, and I couldn't wait to get home, and when I opened it up, somebody cut all the hood patterns out the back of the book. So that was a bit of a disaster. But by this time, I'd met a few other guys, or spoke to them on the phone, and there was one who lived not too far from me, a place called Blackpool, which is across the pond from where I live, Southport. There's a big bay, and Blackpool lies on the other area. And if you could walk across the sands, which you can't because you get cut off by the tide, it's 8 miles, but a round trip is 48 miles. So, I was 15 and didn't have a car. Obviously, I wasn't old enough to drive or have a motorbike, so I had to get a bus to Blackpool. And I went over to see this guy, Terry Pickford, who got falcons. And I spoke to him a few times, and he gave me a pattern for a kestrel. So I took it home, got on the bus, went 48 miles back the other way. So I travelled like 96 miles to get this hood pattern, but it was worth it. The best trip I've ever had in my life. Got it home, got the hood pattern, took it into work. We made our first hood, and it was pretty good. I was impressed with it. The other upholsterers helped me to do it, and it looked good. And that's how it all started, as to say.
Okay. So, yeah, you, as far as who mentored you, though, I mean, who
Flying Birds. Mm-hmm. I mentored myself, really.
Gotcha.
Up until, from 72 to 75, I'd flown the kestrel and then hacked it back to the wild. And then I'd applied for my licence to get the Lanner Falcon. And then when I got the Lanner Falcon, there was a guy in Southport who'd been away from home. He'd been at police college training to be a policeman. But Ian Beecham, he was called. He'd had falcons in years gone by, and he decided that he'd give me a hand, a leg up, show me what to do. And really, Ian, not so much mentoring going out in the field every day and flying the bird with me, but he was at the end of a phone, and if I could say, well, the bird's doing this or the bird's doing that, he'd sort of push me in the right direction and say, well, try this, Steve, or try that, Steve. But most of it was done on my own, learned from my mistakes, really. Yeah. And then, about 1976, I joined the British Falconers Club and got to know loads of guys then around the northwest. Even though there wasn't a lot of people in my town, there was a couple of guys in Liverpool that was sort of, from where I lived, 20 minutes away, or in the other direction towards Preston. I met the guy who's really changed my life in falconry completely, a man called Paul Fields. And he was the last honorary president of the British Falconers Club. And luckily for me, he only lived 12 miles away. But you got to remember, Jonathan, them were days before the internet. So he could have been, 12 miles or 1,200 miles. You just didn't know he was there. But we made the contact. And I went down to a British Falconers Club meeting and introduced myself to him. And we got chatting. And I showed him one of the hoods. And he was very impressed with it. And And he said, "Do you think you could make me a couple of hoods?" So I said, "Yeah." And we struck up a lifelong relationship. And Paul was really my mentor. He taught me about rearing game birds, putting birds on the land, running pointers, flying tiercels. And that's what we did between us for 25 years until he died.
Relationships like that in falconry are hard to come by.
Yeah.
And I totally understand wanting to, or, valuing and appreciating. It's another one of those things where it's kind of like whenever you end up having this amazing bird, right? And then unless you've had a few bad birds first, it's really hard to appreciate the fact that you have an amazing one. And until it's gone, you don't really know what you had. Don't know what you got till it's gone, that kind of thing. It's the same thing with relationships too.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I haven't had to lose any of those relationships yet. There's several guys that I've been fortunate enough to meet and have helped me out over my short career thus far. Definitely short compared to yours. But I'm hoping that time for me is still a long way away.
Let's hope so. Yeah, every year, more guys who I know from the Falconry fraternity pass away. This year we've lost 3 dear friends. You don't realise you're getting old sometimes until you get invited to more funerals and weddings. And this is what happens. As you get older, people die. But you've got the memories, haven't you? You treasure them. Close friends that hawked with, had fun with, had fights with, fallen out with, over different things. But we've all got that passion. We've all been infected by falconry.
Mm-hmm. Yep, indeed. That's a good way of putting it. Well, yeah, it's hard to replace any of that.
Yeah.
And even though whenever you have knockdown dragouts sometimes or whatever, you still kind of come back together because that you all share this common interest. And you just kind of get over it and move on.
Some of the guys you meet along the way, we've met today and we've had a good time chatting and different things. But looking back over the years, in the late 70s, we hosted a field meet in the northwest region of the British Falconers Club, and we used to invite some guests over from Germany. And I've stayed a lifelong friend with one of them. But the customs they did were far different to what I was. My job was to pick them up from a hotel in the middle of a city called Preston to take them to the hunting fields. So we were looking after the birds. We got the birds in the vans, and then I drove down to the hotel in Preston to pick these guys up, and they come out and they've got hunting horns, and 7 o'clock in the morning, it's a ritual in Germany, they blast the hunting horns, and they're blasting the hunting horns outside this hotel, and the guys in the hotel don't know what the hell's going on. Got these guys in like leather pantyhose blowing horns with hats on their heads with feathers in them outside. Very strange, but good friends. One of them, a guy called Ralph Jackensby, he doesn't practice falconry anymore, but I spent many a time with him in Scotland flying birds up there and in the northwest. I never went out to Germany. That's one thing I've regretted. I've never travelled as much as I should have to see some great falconry, because I've had lots of invites. I've got friends in the States, some who are out in the Gulf, a guy who's out in Canada, and people have always said, "Come on, Steve, come out here and practice a bit of hawking out here." And I've never got around to it. But as I'm getting older now, and I'm retired now, these things are coming my way, and I will start doing it. I'm going to go out to the Gulf and see how Hubara's hawked, and I will go out to Canada and go out with my friend and watch his Peel's falcon catching ducks, and I'll go over to the States as well, and maybe even knock on your door, Jonathan.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anytime.
And we'll go out hawking together.
Just give me a little bit of notice. Yeah, I mean, it's our hawking is it can be a little down and dirty sometimes, with getting in the brush and wading through that.
That's
it's
good.
Gonna be pretty, but I'm sure it's nothing that you wouldn't love.
I'll get in there. You just point me in the right direction. You can work me like a pointer. I'll get in there and I'll work to the whistle, and I'll stop when you put your hand up, and I'll bolt them out whichever way you want me to. But yeah.
Well, you'll have to make sure to make them run the right way, because if not, you'll get an earful. I'm telling you.
I've been told off a few times in my early career. Paul Fields, the guy I was talking about, he'd say we'd have the dog on point, and I had a pointer then, and we got it to honour the point, and he wanted me to head the point, get in front of the dogs to block the way for the partridge to get off the field. So I went right around and I was blocking them. I was the block, and they were on, and I could see he was shaking his hands and waving his fist, and because I'd not gone into the right position, But it's all character building, isn't it? And it's I got a good telling off, or a bollocking as my teacher would call it. But yeah, it stuck with me, and it served me well. I learned my apprenticeship.
Well, that's why I'm always so curious to hear what people's initial experiences are, because I just want to keep hearing that they got yelled at as much as I did, and other people do and stuff. So, and then but once it's fun though, because once you get to be a little bit more experienced and stuff, then you get to give the next guy crap too. It's all part of it. It's not for the faint of heart by any stretch.
Well, and that's falconry, isn't it? It's such a demanding hobby. When people say to me, I've loads, I'd like to become a falconer, I'd say, well, there's a lot to it. It's not like a gun or a rod. You can put it away in a cupboard and leave it for 6 months if you don't want to do it. Or, it's not like having a dog. If you want to go on holidays, there's not that many people who look after a falcon for you. And I really try to put people off, but I encourage them as well. I take them out with me to fly the birds and show them about equipment and the husbandry of it. And yeah, there's quite a few who do fall by the wayside, and there's quite a few guys who I've met along the way who haven't got into it, but I still see them now and again, and they ask me how the birds are, and I'm really glad that they didn't take the sport up. But every now and again you get one who comes along and he sticks at it, and it's a good feeling. There's a guy now who lives in the south of the country who rings me every now and again, and he's got a successful peregrine, and I helped him with his early birds to train them, and it feels good to know that I've passed that on. The art has been passed on another generation to a younger guy.
Sure. And
that makes me feel good.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's all part of the weeding out process, I mean, it's not necessarily because you're doing it because you want to be hateful or you want to be mean or whatever, but I mean, people need to know that it's serious, and it's all, at the end of the day, it's all mostly in good fun and stuff anyway. But I mean, people need to have thick skin, and you gotta take stern direction sometimes, because otherwise, a bird may die, if you don't do something right.
Yeah,
so
that's very true.
But yeah, no, I mean, that's great though. I mean, that's interesting that you were another one of these guys that were mostly self-taught initially, and then did have some degree of mentorship later and stuff. But I don't know about you mentioning that, you're retired now, so you have more free time. I mean, just judging by that table in there, it doesn't look like you got a whole lot of free time on your hands with all the hoods and everything that you've made.
We make a few hoods along the way and everything else. And I enjoy doing it. It's been a big part of my life, making hoods. Yeah. It's like, every hood you make, you feel like you've achieved something, and most of the people who the hoods go to, the friends, So I enjoy it. I'm very lucky to do what I do.
Yeah, I mean, talk a little bit about some of that mentorship again. Like I said, as far as that specifically, how long do you feel like it took you before you really were competent and started making hoods that you really felt were super usable?
Yeah, It didn't take that long, to be honest. The Anglo-Indian hoods that didn't have to be formed on a block, that they were pretty easy. My stitching was good because I was an upholsterer, and we had the right sort of leather. Moroccan calf I was using, which made nice Anglo-Indian hoods. Funnily enough, you can't get hold of that Moroccan calf that we were using in them days. Most of the tanneries in this country have shut down now, but there's a few places where you can get half decent stuff from. So from start to finish, I'd say I started when I was 15 making my first hood. By the time I was 16, I was pretty competent at making a hood, an Anglo-Indian hood anyway. And then it evolved into making the blocked hoods, the Dutch hoods. The hardest part then was getting hold of the hood blocks. It's a completely different world now. If I was starting up in hood making again now, I'd just go on the internet and find out where there'd be some hood blocks, and research a bit about the guy who made them and buy them hood blocks and buy the patterns, and you're away making them. When I was starting out, there was no hood blocks. Well, there were hood blocks. There was Mollen hood blocks, which had been used by the Mollen family in Holland for trapping hawks, and I managed to get hold of a set of them from a guy called Anthony Jacks, who was president of the British Falconry Club, and I got them copied. And that's where the early hoods I was making, the Dutch hoods, they come off them blocks. And you can still make good hoods off them blocks, They served the Mollen family well for 80-odd years, and they served me well for quite a few years. But then, my hoods evolved into how I thought they should be. I had a friend who was a tool maker, a pattern maker, and we sort of had the Mollen blocks, and how we built them a little bit up with plastic in certain places and changed this and tweaked that. And that went on for about a good 3 or 4 years before I got the hood blocks that I wanted to use. And they are what I've been using for the last 20, 30 years. And they've served me well. But yeah, not long. There's a few young guys now who have started making hoods, and I help them along the way if I can. And there's one in particular who's getting in fact, he's getting too good at making them hoods. And he's been doing them for now about perhaps 2.5 years, and he's producing a good hood. It's like anything, it takes time and it takes practice, and the key element is wanting to do it. It's like when you want to be a falconer, you've got to stick at it. All the tribulations and downfalls from it all. It's the same with hood making or any art you go into. You just got to practice. Practice. My maths teacher told me, Mr. Halsall, practice will make perfect. And them words ring true in my ears as today.
Anything you want to be good at, you got to practice, and just keep trucking on.
And I think it's having that passion too, Jonathan, isn't it? It's that wanting to do it, Like I say, there's a couple of good guys now who are making hoods, and they will get better as they get older. They will get better at their art, no doubt about it. And hopefully by that time I'll have finished making hoods. But it's nice to know that people are coming through who want to do it as well, that it's not going to die out. As we spoke today about a couple of guys in the States who and I've had conversations with, and them guys are getting old as well. And I hope, we should pass these techniques and this art on we've got to other people. We mustn't let it die.
Oh, I agree, because I can't make them. And I don't have the, as we were talking earlier, I don't have the patience, time, or energy to devote to that. I mean, I'm not a very crafty or artsy guy in that way. So I'm more than happy to pay and support other falconers and that love doing it or are good at it. And I really don't want those people to stop doing it because, I'm going to need hoods. So
times are good now. But like we said earlier, in 1972, you couldn't, get on the internet and order an hood. There was nobody making them. There was 2 people in this country who sold hoods professionally in the early 70s, and that was a guy called Roger Upton, who was a renowned falconer who passed on a few years ago. And Roger's given me a lot of help along the way. And there was another guy called Philip Glacier who run the Falconry Centre at New Ent, and he made really good hoods as well. But you get in touch with them, and Roger would be away in the Gulf Hawk in Hubara somewhere, and Glacier just couldn't be bothered to make hoods anymore, So there was no option but do it yourself. Mm-hmm. And some of the hoods were very crude looking back on them. In fact, I should have brought one with me to show you today. One of the early hoods that I must have made in the early 70s, but probably 71, 72. And my mum had kept it, and she'd put it in a box, and I didn't even realise my mother had kept it until she died. And I was going through some of her personal belongings, wondering what we should keep, mementos for the kids and things, of value and sentimental value. And there was this box, and we opened it up, And there was 2 hoods there that I'd made back in the early 70s, and she must have been so proud of me, and she'd kept them hoods. I'd have thrown them in the bin, they were so bad, but she and looking at them, they were crude, but they did the job. They might not look the best hood you've ever seen, but they served a purpose. They hooded the bird, they didn't touch his eyes, there was no discomfort on them, and they were easy to use. So, even I've seen some really good-looking hoods over the years, but when I've seen them on the birds, they've not been that good. Mm-hmm. So just because they look good doesn't mean they are good.
No,
sometimes.
I totally agree. Like we were talking earlier, I love whenever a hood's very lightweight and the braces are smooth and they tighten and loosen smoothly and I mean there's so many different things that go into good quality things like that. So a lot of people when I look at birds that are hooded and photographs, and they say, oh, I've got this perfect fitting hood, and it's not perfect. Mm-hmm. I know that. I'm a hood maker, and I know it's not. I know if they're happy with it, well, that's okay, and if the bird's happy with it, well, that's okay. Mm. But I some of them just aren't that good. But there are some excellent hoods out there as well, and a lot of people, the art of hooding birds as well. It's an art in itself. I see some people who are trying to cram a hood on a bird's head and it's shaking its head this way and the other way, and they're getting frustrated, and the bird's getting frustrated, and the hood's not going to go on its head, and it's just pitiful. Anybody who knows how to hood a bird, take your time, get it into a darkened room, spray it down, get it damped down so it's nice and cool, and then just gently, try and get the hood on its head or off its head. And I see some people, I'll watch them over this weekend hooding birds, and I think, well, you're not too good at this. And yet you see other people who are naturals. Funnily enough, my son, who's not interested in falconry now, he was at an early age. He had a really nice hybrid, our Thomas, but as he got older, he found girls and bass guitars, I'm afraid to say, Jonathan, and you know what that leads to, Jonathan, don't you? Yes, I do.
So Thomas come out of falconry, even though he sometimes comes out and flies a bird with me. He's in the army now, but when he's at home, he'll come out and watch a bird fly. But Thomas, from an early age, was a naturally good hooder. He'd obviously seen me hooding birds for many years, and I'd basically shown him how to hood the birds. But, I watched him and his first kestrel and then the hybrid that he had, and it was like poetry in motion. Watch how easy that the bird didn't move, wasn't flicking its head anywhere. That hood was slipping on and off its head so nicely. It was like poetry in motion, and he was a good hooder. And you get some people who aren't naturally good hooders, and they just never seem to get the technique of hooding birds properly. They can hood birds, and the birds are okay with it, but, I watch them and I cringe sometimes watching them trying to push the fingers at the back of the bird's nape there to get the hood on its head. So there's a lot to be said about hooding. It's an art in itself. If you've read any of the old books, look at the chapter on hooding in Gilbert Blaine's Falconry, excellent chapter on how to hood a bird. Or even a guy who was really before his time, who I admire immensely. He wrote a book called Observations Upon Falconry, and that was Ronald Stevens, written in a great year, 1957, the year I was born, funnily enough. But if you read his chapter on hooding birds, and that was a guy who was miles ahead of his time. He was dealing with, which weren't termed as imprints, but they were imprints, gerfalcons that he had, and he was hooding them, and the techniques that he gives, he writes a chapter on it. But that guy, he's a guy I'd have loved to have met, because he was way ahead of his time. Really great person. Be great if we could go back in time and see some of these guys, wouldn't it?
Well, it'd be great to go back in time and record a bunch of podcasts with a bunch of them too. Yeah. But unfortunately, every passing year we lose a lot of those opportunities. So
well, we've talked about that a little bit, haven't we?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, but I mean, it's awesome though that guys like yourself have been so passionate about doing this over the years, and hood making and not just hoods but gloves and other pieces of falconry equipment and stuff too, because once again, like I said, I'm terrible at it. I have there's no hope for me whatsoever, so I hope that more and more people continue to pick it up and progress with it over time. But But before we run out of time and before we have to go and start doing some other stuff, I want to talk to you a little bit about kind of what falconry looks like for you now, kind of your just general approach and what a hunt typically looks like for you now and what type of game you're primarily on, and then end with a good story or two.
I'll do my best. Really, as time goes by and I've reached retirement, I'm a lot more laid back now about me hawking and what I do and what I don't do. And all I want to do is go out with my friends, fly the tearsalls at Partridge, get on some decent land, take our time. And, it's as much of a stroll for me nowadays as going hawking. I like to look at see what crops are around in the fields, see what other games on there, see what many meadow pipits or larks, see how the lapwings are doing. Have a look on the ponds, see what ducks are about. The other problem is, of course, is AI at the moment. It's causing a lot of problems hunting ducks in this country. But just a good day out with me, good company, good friends. Watch some good dog work, see some good tearsalls flying fairly high, hopefully, and the kills immaterial. Doesn't matter. We don't go home with a partridge in the bag. We can take a couple of potatoes out the field or a couple of carrots, so we're not going to go hungry. But yeah, just a laid back approach, meeting good friends, having good times, and savouring it. Over the last 2 or 3 years, me and 2 other friends, we've sort of our lives are changing, evolving with, kids growing up, and we've got more time on our hands, and we're doing this, and we've rekindled that friendship between the 3 of us, and that's the best part, the friendship. Good hawks are hard to come by, but good friends are even harder. So you got to make the most of it.
Agreed. Totally agree. Is there anything in particular that you look back on now as being way more experienced in your approach to training or hunting that you do different now, as that you just kind of think back on and cringe or anything?
Well, I'm the new boy now, you see, because all these other guys have got the GPSs and the drones. So this is something I'm going to have to learn about, because over the last 10 years, my falconry, I haven't done that much because of commitments at home and to the family. I've still gone out into the field and watched friends flying their birds, but this year I hope to take a tearsall up again. So maybe I'll get one of these drones, or I've got telemetry obviously, but maybe get a GPS system. I don't know about that. But the recipe I always followed was I put young falcons on young game and let them progress naturally with the game. And as they get fit, they catch more game. But looking at these drones and how high they can take the bird into the sky and everything else, that's something I've got to learn, isn't it? I suppose. Maybe interview me in a couple of years, and I'll say, "Hey, them drones are a waste of time. Made no difference to my bird." Or I might say, "Hey, Jonathan, these drones are the things. Why didn't we have these 30 years ago?" So let's see what unfolds, and hopefully the future's bright. The area I live, we've been out, spotting. There's a few coveys of greys about. We've got permission off the farmers to go on the land to hunt the birds. If we can go out and have a flight, and if we get a kill, that's good for the falcon. If we don't, we see a spectacular flight, see some good dog working and some good points. That'll make me happy.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it may not even take 2 years. The first time you try taking up a drone, it might be 10 minutes. You might say that I hate this. I don't know, but you never know. I mean, some people take to it and love it, and you're either going to love it or hate it. So but I mean, at least you're willing to try.
I'll give it a go. Yeah,
try and adapt. But and if you do end up getting the GPS, as we talked about earlier, you'll love that advantage. For sure.
Sure,
it's worth its weight in gold if you're really wanting to get your bird quick. So
it's got to be, hasn't it? Like we talked about before. many years ago when I lost a red Shaheen hawking, and we didn't have telemetry in them days. We only had a bell on the bird. And, it was like a death in the family, that bird going. I put so much time into it, and he was flying so well. But I'm sure with telemetry, I'd have had him back within an hour. So things progress, don't they? As we said before, telemetry. I remember the first telemetry set I got from the States, from F&L Electronics, the Falconer unit was like a brick on your side, but it was great. I can remember the first time I used it and I'd lost a bird. We were over in a place called North Yorkshire at a field meet at Ripon, and I was flying a Lanarette and I'd lost him, and he'd just gone, and he'd gone out of the range of the receiver. So we drove around for a bit, and the first time I heard that, beep, 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 beep,
Yep.
beep, beep. And, that was the best feeling. Almost as good as one of my mother's Sunday roast dinners, that. But it was good, yeah. So that was good. Telemetry's great, but this GPS, like you say, yeah, if it can find your bird a lot quicker, then it's got to be the thing to do, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has its ups and downs, just like any form of technology. But I would never go back at this point. I've gotten too used to the convenience, and there's a lot to be said for shaving off, the hour or two that it would normally take to find a bird in down to 10, 15 minutes. You can literally just drive right up, and just call your bird back. Of course, that doesn't mean that your bird's going to come back, but that's a whole other different set of, trouble there. So, but anyway, well, I think this would be a good time to go ahead and end on a particular story about a hunting experience or a bird or something that sticks out in your mind. I know you've been doing this a very long time, and there's probably lots of hunts and lots of birds, but there's always seems to be one experience or one bird in particular that sticks out in a falconer's mind that's like their, at least up until this point in time, is like the pinnacle for them. So
okay, well, there's been a few flights that I've enjoyed over the years, but I suppose one of the main ones was with my old mentor Paul Fields, who I mentioned earlier, had died. It was a September. We both had young Tearsall peregrines. We were hawking in a ground called Banks, which is just on the outskirts of Southport. It was a September day, early September, so partridge season had started. And it was one of them warm winds that was blowing. It was more like mid-August and mid-September. We were in shirt sleeves. We drove onto the stubble field. We scanned it with the scope, and we picked up a covey of grey partridge. Must have been 10 or 15 birds in the covey. And Paul said to me, well, you can fly your Tearsall first. So we got the dogs out. The old Penny, the old pointer, come on to point, and then the putt was honouring the point. And it was just one of those days when everything come together. I lifted my hand. He roused. Well, I unhooded him, lifted him up. He roused, preened, did a poo, then took off, and straight away he started to climb. He had about half a dozen kills under his belt by now, but now he was becoming wed to partridge. He sort of knew what we wanted him to do. Like when you start off a bird, it doesn't exactly know that you want it to go up to 500 feet and come down and catch this partridge. But we got there, and he started mounting. He was getting up to a good pitch. It was a good day. He got into a bit of a thermal and went higher and higher. And we've never had spectacularly high-flying birds because we hawk in small fields, so if they go up to 1,000 feet or 1,500 feet, by the time they get down, the partridge have made it to cover usually. So, but anyway, we got him up and we brought him back overhead. The pointers were vibrating, and we sent them in, and they flushed this covey of about 15 or 20 birds. And greys are different to red partridge. Red partridge don't explode into the earth. They flush in ones or twos, but it was just a mass explosion. And he folded up, and we watched him dropping down, and you could hear the impact that as his bell hit, as he struck the partridge, knocked it over, he threw up, and he come down, and he made into it. And we walked across the field, And we laid the dogs down by his side, and we took a photograph of him on this first real partridge he'd taken, his proper partridge. And we just looked at each other, and we sort of said, well, it doesn't get much better than this. We went back to the Range Rover, and we had a glass of whiskey, and we went home.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, that's awesome. Like I said, it's especially when you're incorporating dogs and other aspects of your team, and when everything comes together, there really isn't much better.
Yeah, that was the thing. It come together. You know, everything was good. The weather was good. The tarsal was at the right weight and in good condition. The dogs worked well. It was a lovely field. We were on a stubble field. Saw the flight perfectly, and it sort of made 30 years of falconry come together on that day and think, this is the sport.
Very nice, very nice. Well, I think then I would like to end on a note that I've been kind of asking this one particular question at the end of these recordings to people, especially experienced guys like yourself. And is there any pearl of wisdom or any piece of advice, lasting advice that you'd like to pass on to other generations that are listening?
Well, one bit of advice would be, if your bird isn't coming along as well as it should be, don't walk out of your mews and headbutt the wall. That's for sure, because that doesn't get you nowhere. It's no, not really. Just enjoy what you're doing. It's it'll come together. Keep at it. If you want to do something and you've got a passion for it, do it. Also, treat everybody the same. Other falconers who you might disagree with, or like the guy who told me about the new technique. Try this with the sake of falcon. Well, listen to advice. 50 years on, and more than likely this weekend I'll be asking you about GPS systems. Take advice. Any advice is good advice. Yeah,
well, I agree. And I think on that note, that would be the perfect time this would be the perfect time to go ahead and end things. And it's been great. I'm sure we'll get a chance to hang out some more and talk some more as the weekend progresses. But I hope you sell the hell out of a lot of hoods this weekend, and I hope you make out like a bandit. And I can say that I'm very impressed by the quality of your hoods. I'm definitely am going to have to figure out some kind of arrangement that I can get at least one or two from you before the end of the weekend. But if anyone is interested in getting hoods from you, how can they go about acquiring them from you?
Well, at the moment, I only do hoods by word of mouth. I'm making them for friends. If they come down to one of the shows that I'm at, now I'm retired, I'll have hoods available, but mostly words of mouth. Most people in this country know me as a hood maker, so.
Gotcha. So no email or no website. No email. No, you don't want to be too busy, right? You actually like being quote unquote retired, so to speak, right?
I like being retired. Yeah.
Okay. Well, fair enough. Well, thanks again, Steve, so much for your time.
Hey, thanks for asking me, Jonathan. It's been great chatting.
This has been awesome, and I think people are going to enjoy it. And like I said, it's always a pleasure meeting new people at these things and getting a chance to sit down and do this. So thank you again.
And thank you. We'll go and have a beer.
Yes, we will.